Testing, testing.
Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to the Children's Scrutiny panel. We'll start with membership of the committee. My name is Cathal Burke and I chair the Children's Scrutiny panel. If we start with panel members and then move on to officers.
Councillor Donna Bellamy. Councillor Lisa Holmes.
Dale Neil, Voluntary Co-op T.
Ophelia Ricks, Head of Safeguarding and Quality Assurance.
Good morning, I'm Elaine McShane, Service Director for Family Support and Child Protection.
Superintendent Marianne Hewison from West Yorkshire Police. I lead on crime and safeguarding.
Morning, Wendy Blakely, Head of Public Protection.
Samantha Lawson, Operations Manager and Licensing.
Joanne Sanders, Service Director for Learning and Early Support.
Thank you and welcome. Item 2 on the agenda is interest. If any councillors have any interest, to declare if they can fill out the appropriate paperwork and hand it in after the meeting. 3 is admission of the public. All items to be taken in public today. Item 4 is a revised contextual safeguarding strategy. 5 is the risk and vulnerability team, and we're going to take 4 and 5 together, followed by 6, which is licensing. And just a reminder about the work that we're doing today around CSE. The presentation today is to answer any questions which have previously been raised by the scrutiny panel, setting out the context of the current approach in respect of a range of risk and vulnerability areas for children and young people. As we know, officers will not be able to discuss individual cases or identify specific areas of increased concern. This is due to the confidential matters and the sensitive nature of the information which is shared and could inadvertently increase risk. So, item 4, I will hand you over for the presentation.
Good morning, panel. Obviously, I'm Marianne Hewison, I'm Detective Superintendent with lead for crime and safeguarding, but I also am the joint chair of the Kirklees Safeguarding Children's Board with strategic lead, along with Elaine McShane, for our partnership response to tackling CSE. We lead a strategic group which is made up of a number of partner agencies, including licensing, that's here today. And I'm here really to talk to you about the work that we're currently doing to combat child sexual exploitation and indeed other forms of child criminal exploitation. For several years, the Safeguarding Board has been proactive in working in partnership to tackle child sexual exploitation and keep our children and young people safe. That's been led by what was previously the Child Sexual Exploitation Work Stream, and they had an action plan which commenced in 2016 and has finally been completed. However, reflecting on the changes in working together, our recent experience of complex non-recent child sexual exploitation cases and emerging safeguarding concerns for our young people, we have changed our approach. We've looked at best practice nationally, and we've looked at academic research, and we've reviewed our approach, and we have developed our contextual safeguarding strategy, which is what we're going to talk to you a little bit about today. So what was previously the strategic CSE and missing group and work stream is now a contextual safeguarding strategic work stream. There is an operational group that sits below that, which Ophelia Ricks and Detective Chief Inspector Richard McNamara co-chair, again a multi-agency group, and they have developed an action plan that we will work towards. So I'm going to try and introduce this contextual safeguarding to you. And actually, a picture paints 1,000 words, so the first thing I'm going to do is show you a little video. I apologise for the American accent, but hopefully this will say to you in a much more concise and effective way than I can what contextual safeguarding is all about, because this is a different approach to safeguarding children. So,
contextual safeguarding is an approach to safeguarding children and young people that recognizes and responds to their experiences of significant harm beyond the boundaries of their home. Contextual safeguarding approaches require practitioners to identify and respond to risks and vulnerabilities facing young people in a range of social environments. In other words, the contextual approach to safeguarding identifies and responds to more than individual risk factors and vulnerabilities. Child protection and safeguarding structures already routinely identify and respond to violence and abuse experienced by young people within their family or home settings. However, these structures are yet to consistently engage with other social environments where young people spend their time. As young people enter adolescence, they spend increasing amounts of time outside of the home and may experience violence and abuse within these public environments. We know that a young person's peer group can be more influential than their family when it comes to setting standards of what is normal, and we know that peer-on-peer abuse can affect any young person. While schools can be a protective factor for many young people, research has also documented young people's experience of sexual harassment and other forms of peer-on-peer abuse in educational settings. Schools have also been sites of peer recruitment into abuses and sometimes organized networks of exploitation. We know that young people experience violence and abuse in public spaces. Exposure to violence on the streets has been routinely linked to a young person's involvement in street gangs, and young people have been sexually exploited in parks, transport hubs, shopping centers, and other public spaces. Contextual safeguarding calls for a safeguarding system that assesses risk and intervenes to protect young people beyond the boundaries of their home. For more information and resources, please visit the website of the Contextual Safeguarding Network.
I hope that sort of puts things without important into context. But as a parent myself, and obviously worked in safeguarding, I was one of the first ones that I joined Westminster Police 30 years ago. Do you want me to say that again? Is that all right? Traditionally, child protection has been about children suffering abuse in the home or abuse from somebody that they're familiar to them, and that their parents have been unable to protect them. I think when we look at particularly child sexual exploitation, we know from experience that actually these children can live in really good homes. They can be achieving academically, they can be well off, they're not necessarily deprived children living in a deprived background, but at some moment in time they've become vulnerable for a number of reasons, and at that point they are vulnerable to being exploited, and unfortunately within society there are those people that will go out there to exploit our children and young people. So actually our traditional child protection procedures don't really help us as effectively as they could do to address that and keep those children safe. Working together has been refreshed and it reflects contextual safeguarding, but actually as a child protection system we've actually had to look at how we provide our services to children, young people and their families to keep them safe, and that's meant a massive change in actually how we deliver our services across Kirklees, of which you'll hear more of the actual operational nuts and bolts about how that works now. But I'll talk to you about the strategy, I guess. So our vision for Kirklees is that people live in cohesive communities, they feel safe and are protected from harm, and that we, all the agencies involved, provide high quality, joined up and accessible services which safeguard our children and adults from harm. We've got to recognise that actually some of the children that were sexually exploited are now adults, and we need to have services that will help them to make sure that they live as fulfilled a possible life and that they're able to protect their children in the future. So the strategy provides a strategic framework to further develop and strengthen our response in the identification, assessment and intervention when children, young people and vulnerable adults are being exploited. So we aim to make it clear that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, not just that of children's services, but by joining up with partners, including schools, we can ensure that children and adults have good access to well-informed advice, support and decision-making from across the partnership, and that there are effective, timely and proportionate responses when exploitation, abuse and harm occurs, and that we ensure that there is a child or indeed person-centred approach to what we do. No, it's fine. Yet the world of safeguarding is ever-changing, becoming increasingly complex and is under intense scrutiny through the media, inspections and inquiries. Child sexual exploitation, peer-on-peer violence, abuse, modern-day slavery, harmful sexual behaviour and abuse including gangs and groups, criminal exploitation and children that go missing from home or care should not be seen in isolation, as they often overlap, creating a complex set of harmful circumstances and experiences for children, young people, families and communities. So contextual safeguarding has been developed at the University of Bedfordshire over the past 6 years to inform policy and practice approaches to safeguarding adolescents. Initially emerging from a 3-year review of operational responses to peer-on-peer abuse, contextual safeguarding provides a framework to advance child protection and safeguarding responses to a range of extra familial risks that compromise the safety and welfare of young people. Okay, so we've talked about what contextual safeguarding is, and I suppose what I'm talking about is some of those pull factors that are pulling children away from their safe environment at home. And as you'll appreciate, in the digital age, our children are not safe necessarily even in the home, even if their parents provide a safe environment. And we know that certainly online abuse is very prevalent, and those influences on children through the digital media. So why do we need a strategy to combat these types of exploitation? I suppose thinking about our local context, we are partway through a really large prosecution for historic or non-recent CSE in Kirklees, and it's fair to say that you know, for some time in the future we will continue to respond to reports of non-recent exploitation, child sexual exploitation. So how do we learn those lessons and make sure that those things don't go on today for our children? Also, when I look at the local context, we do have some groups, individuals within Kirklees that seek to exploit children for criminal means, specifically really the supply of controlled drugs. So we know that that's an issue for us, and we have to look at how do we deal with those children and young people who are being exploited before they go on to commit criminal offences themselves. So we need to look at how we're going to do that. We need to look at what is the cause, not just the symptom, because somebody might be a victim of CSE, as I've already said. They're vulnerable. Something makes that child vulnerable. It could be a bereavement within the family. It could be moving house, moving school. It could be just feeling a little bit fat and fed up, and somebody's giving you some attention and telling you that you're beautiful and buying you gifts. It could be a whole multitude of things. But there's nothing to say that because you're a victim of CSE or criminal exploitation, there might be other things going on around your life. You might be subject to peer-on-peer abuse. You might be in a household where there is domestic abuse, or other forms of abuse that are going to impact on you. So we need to look at that child as an individual, and then we need to look at the context in which they are living, which goes back to those circles on the presentation. We need a whole systems approach. We've got some really good firm foundations following the Child Improvement Plan that we've been working on for some time now, and Ophelia will come and talk to you about some of those foundations and work particularly of our multi-agency front door and a risk and vulnerability hub. But by working through the Safeguarding Children's Board in these multi-agency groups, we can make sure that we're responding to those emerging threats and working really effectively together. We have some really strong partnership commitment to these areas of work, not just from the three key safeguarding partners, health, the police and social care, but from the wider partnerships. Schools particularly have been very vocal and are very keen to work with us to keep their children safe. Governance, I've already talked about. This work sits firmly underneath the Children's Safeguarding Board. There are clear overlaps into the Adult Safeguarding Board and the Community Safety Partnership, and all three parties sit together at both the strategic and operational level, so there is the read across into those other groups. Okay. Not surprisingly, from any kind of multi-agency plan, we have the four Ps. So our strategic objectives are around prepare, so to develop a comprehensive and accurate intelligence picture which will inform our local partnership understanding and enable swift, coordinated multi-agency responses to safeguard children and prevent, divert or prosecute those who seek to facilitate and or perpetrate the exploitation, abuse and harm of children and young people. Within policing, we use the problem-solving triangle. So we would look at dealing with any problem to look at the victim, the offender and the location in which that crime, incident, problem takes place. So one of the things that we have developed already, but we'll look to further refine, is actually looking where these things are taking place. Not just around CSE, but again around criminal exploitation, and looking across the wider partnership to see what we can do to make places safe. One of the initiatives that we are looking at is safe places within the town centre. So if our children are vulnerable throughout the nighttime economy, then there are places that they can go to where they can be safe and be protected. Protect, we're developing and further developing effective practice and service provision to protect children, young people, vulnerable adults, families and communities. This type of abuse does not take place in isolation, and actually our communities can be our eyes and our ears, they can be our social conscience, they can provide that narrative that says that this type of abuse is not acceptable, and often the communities and voluntary sector groups have got a huge part to play in providing services and support to those children and their families. And it's important that we empower and enable those communities. Prevent, we're going to prevent children, young people and vulnerable adults experiencing or continuing to experience exploitation, harm and abuse by responding to information and intelligence that identifies those groups and individuals and locations of concern and highlights to us patterns and trends so that we can work on that. And pursue, obviously that's mainly a police-led piece of work, but using our information intelligently to prosecute those who seek to facilitate and or perpetrate exploitation. So not just thinking about the individual children, but actually going further up the tree, particularly in terms of organised criminal groups around drugs, but also around human trafficking, so that we can be more effective in our approach and we prevent further harm to young people in the future. But again, there's some challenges for us in actually taking a person-centred approach. It's not that many years ago when we were looking at child victims of sexual exploitation as it being a lifestyle choice, or going back further and the changes in law that they were dealt with as child prostitutes. Fortunately, current thinking is far, far different to that. But actually, when we start to talk about young children that are perhaps involved in trafficking drugs, who too are being subject to exploitation, I think there's a...
With the young person, but also it's about a wider multi-agency response. So again, it's thinking about our health partners, the third sector organisations, and linking into the community. We are really clear that in terms of exploitation, we recognise that it's complex, and that the response just cannot be in terms from a single agency. We have to work collaboratively with all agencies, because otherwise we're not effective and we're not actually responding and managing those risks. And then it's really important that we also develop our staff as well. So it's ensuring that we provide a high quality support. It means that we also have to ensure that our staff and practitioners across the multi-agency has a good and wide understanding, shared understanding around what's complex safeguarding and contextual safeguarding. And within that, we have a clear multi-agency information sharing, that we ensure that information shared across the agencies. This again, and to look at ensuring that we've got clear structures for our children and young people. So just in terms of in front of you, well, in terms of the, you'll see that we've got how the contextual safeguarding model works. So what's actually key and what's central is the child. And then we actually consider, so what are the issues, what are the impacts in terms of what's actually happening within the home environment. So we consider not just the child, but also the wider family and siblings. We also consider what are the risk factors within the household. So we don't do that exclusively, we do that in terms of where it's inclusive. Then we think about what are the issues, what are potentially the push and pull factors in terms of peer groups. And then we think about what are some of the issues within the school environment, and then we look beyond that in terms of the neighbourhood. So it's really important that we not just consider the factors and indicators within the home, but also what impact is there in terms of their peer groups, because again, and we also consider risks to their wider peer group, and then we look at the school and the neighbourhood. So, for example, we also look at locations of concern as well. So we've got to think about if there's a particular park where children congregate, so what can we do to ensure that we're making spaces safe for children and young people. So that's some of the work that's considered within the concept or the model in relation to contextual safeguarding. So just in terms of the work specifically to the risk and vulnerabilities team, the team has come together based on, we initially had a team that was just focused around looking at children who were missing, and then we had a separate team that looked at particularly around CSE. In terms of the work and the research, it's clear that we cannot consider risk and vulnerability in isolation, that we have to work with them together. So we've brought the two teams together, and the model is based on a very much a strength-based approach, and it's working flexibly with the young people and their families. And we're developing a team that's not just working around core hours, because we absolutely appreciate that exploitation doesn't happen 8:30 to 5. It happens outside of those hours. So we've got a team that's working flexible, that will work evenings and also weekends with families. So we thought that was really important that we actually develop that approach. And the team focuses on the issues around the young people, about how can we keep them safe, and not just focus on the exploitation. So it's about thinking about their own skill set. It's about building their self-esteem, because they're the things, and offering other opportunities for young people. In terms of the team, it consists of social workers. We've got the early intervention, so we've got family support. We're working alongside the police. We've got the young people's drug and alcohol team. We're working with the health partnership, and working with the specifically in terms of the police CSE and missing coordinators. We've also a joint funded a post in terms of the parent liaison officer. So they're based with PACE. I don't know whether you've heard of the organisation. So we've funded a post because they're very skilled. So we felt that we needed to have some additional expertise and skills within the team, so to develop our approach and the work that we do with families. In terms of the support, we have cases that are allocated social workers, and the team also works with the wider children's services. So we offer support to all the teams where the case is not actually specifically open to the risk and vulnerabilities team, because it's really important that we have a consistent approach and we develop the skills and expertise not just in the risk and vulnerabilities team but across the whole of children's services. We aim to provide a flexible and responsive intervention service, and it's based on a multi-agency assessment of risk and vulnerability. So we assess all aspects. We also assess what's actually happening within the home environment, and we also consider impact on the siblings within that. So we're in the process of actually developing where we've got working with siblings of the children who are exploited. So again, so that we can actually ensure that they're safe and that they have an understanding, and that they can also add to that support as well for their sibling, old sibling who's exploited. We have really good intervention plans now that are very much focused on the needs of the young person. So our service is flexible. So again, it's about being creative in terms of the needs of the young people, because we often have services that are one size fits all, but we appreciate we can't have that approach with families. So we have a very much a flexible approach, and it's very much needs-led. As part of the work that we do, we also offer return interviews. So where a child's gone missing, we'll also look at what the push and pull factors in relation to that, but we'll also offer one-to-one support as well. So we don't just go out and do the interview and then go away. Where there's a need and there's that the family needs some intervention, then we'll do that support. And we'll also then signpost them to other services that will be most appropriate to work as well. So again, we will facilitate that work. Just in terms of our approach, we're looking at developing a single point of contact, because we recognise that agencies or families come into different points within the organisation, which is not helpful. So we're looking at having one point of contact, and that we then look at what is it that the family needs and who's the most appropriate person to respond. So that panel is made up of the police, licensing, health, education, third sector organisation, drug and alcohol team. So we've got all agencies, and where appropriate we also have adults involved within that as well. Because again, we recognise that there's also not just needs about the children within the household, but there'll be areas of work that we also need to do with the families or the parents within that. So there's issues or specific issues that relate to mental health. then we'll look at through adult services how can we ensure that families get the right support. We're also implementing or in the early stages of developing a transitions process, because we recognise that children and young people, once they reach the age of 18, that risk and vulnerability just doesn't stop there. So we've got to do work beyond that in terms of into early adult life, that they're actually getting the right support, and to ensure that they're supported well throughout that early adult stuff. So we know there's issues around their mental health. We know there are issues around sort of their resilience and their emotional ability. So we've got to look at how do we ensure that we maintain the same level of support and intervention beyond the age of 18. So we're doing some work within that. So in due course we should be able to come back here and provide you with the framework in terms of what that's going to look like in terms of that pathway. So just in terms of the other work that we need to do as well, we need to actually strengthen the evening nighttime economy work. So it's about ensuring our visibility, a wider visibility within the community. So I know that there's work that's been undertaken around work with hotels, in terms of, oh hang on, skipped a page, sorry. Just in terms of hotels, bed and breakfast, we've done work in terms of test purchase, but we've got some more work to do on that, and I think we've got to really strengthen that. So that's one of our key priorities in terms of strengthening the work that's already in place around the evening time economy. But it's also about the risk and vulnerabilities team also being out there and doing those joint test purchases with the police and with licensing. Yeah, sorry, go back a page. So just in terms of our approach, it's very much about our problem solving. So we're working very closely with the police in terms of looking at locations of concerns, looking at what is it that we need to do differently. We're also working very much with, in terms of the early support and the wider communities. We've got a lot of work that we still need to do in relation to implementing and embedding the model within the wider community. And then also looking at the work around taxiing. I mean, I won't talk about that because we've got our taxiing service here that will provide a wider overview in relation to the work that they do, but we do work very much closely alongside them. And then in terms of we work very closely with the wider districts and within our region in terms of the work in relation to sharing best practice, and it's about ensuring that we've got a consistent response, because we know that children and young people will travel or be exploited over into other districts. So we're working very close with them that we've got a consistent approach and response to that work. So that's work that's ongoing. And we're also working very closely within education and developing that wider understanding. The risk and vulnerabilities team are currently going into schools to do some of that work, to share our expertise, and that will continue. So that's me in terms of the work of the risk and vulnerabilities team. So. It's me, sorry. So, it's still me, apologies for that. So, and in terms of the, I think I've quite summarised that. So we're doing a lot of work as well, because we think that's one of the key bits around gangs and groups. We're doing work around knife crimes, and we're doing that in very much in collaboration with education, because we've got to ensure, because they're the first point of contact with children and young people. So it's a real priority that we actually work and support and to ensure that the young people are getting the right response at the right time. So that work is ongoing. So there's some really good examples of work that we're doing to develop that. We're also looking to create safe spaces. So there's a scheme in place to look at how can we ensure that Kirklees is a safe place for children and young people. And one of the key things that we've done as well in terms of that collaboration is that the police have got an intelligence portal where education and parents can actually access and provide information within that. And we've got quite a number of schools now that are signed up, and it's a really good opportunity to provide that information, because then it facilitates and enables the police to actually identify those locations of concern and a much more timely response to disruption. So we'll just continue our work in relation to continue our engagement and diversion and working to keep children and young people safe within Kirklees.
Yeah, apologies. DCI Richard McNamara was going to be with us today, but unfortunately he's not been able to make it, so he would have talked through with Ophelia some of those issues. There's a couple of things that I'd just like to add to, really. The intelligence portal, it's a web-based system in which individual schools or departments within the council can sign up and they can submit intelligence which goes straight through to our West Yorkshire Police Intelligence Hub, which is based in Bradford. We've had tremendous success with this in Kirklees. It's been particularly valuable for schools, but actually 40% of all the intelligence that's coming across that portal now is from Kirklees, and actually we're about 19% in terms of our slice of 100% of West Yorkshire. So actually we are batting well above our weight in terms of the quantity and quality of intelligence that's coming through, which can really help us to build that intelligence picture so we know who is committing abuse and where it's taking place and what sorts of abuse, so we can actually start to work a little bit more strategically around dealing with those threats. The other bit I was going to mention as well is we're continually looking for new ways to strengthen the resource we have available to work with children and young people. As from the 1st of April, we'll have an organisation called Liaison and Diversion working in Kirklees. That is a team of 10 people who will work with either young people that are in custody or young people that have come to the attention of the police or other partner agencies to provide them with that support and divert them away from offending. So again, that team will work very, very closely with the Risk and Vulnerability Hub and will significantly enhance our ability to keep our children safe in Kirklees. I could go on. There's lots of examples of when things have worked really well. Certainly Ophelia talked about the flexible approach. From a personal note, from a police, you know, it is not unusual to have social workers, social work managers on a Sunday afternoon in Castlegate Police Station problem solving with us around vulnerable children when actually those services would generally speaking be closed. So we've had some really good interventions, and without mentioning specific cases, we've looked really differently about how we can support a child. And does that mean taking the child out of the household? Sometimes it means yes, but sometimes that might mean moving family members with them or providing one-to-one care for that child somewhere safe throughout the country, short term, until we can make that family more resilient to have that child back in their care, whether those extreme pull factors pulling that child into a really risky situation. So operationally this is really happening really well, but I think the work that's been done by our colleagues in licensing is just typical really of some of the partnership work that is being taken to tackle exploitation of our children and keep them safer. So I'll shut up now and hand over to Wendy.
Morning everybody. It's actually a double act, so I'll do a brief introduction and then I'll be handing over to Sam. So it's really important things that we're dealing with here, and I had a wonderful morning on Friday with Children's Services, and it's following on here. looking at the partnership working that we're all doing throughout our services in relation to children and vulnerable people. So I'm head of public protection, and the services that come under public protection are licensing, so taxi licensing and premises licensing, but also food safety, health and safety, pollution and noise control. Those services all touch either premises where children and vulnerable people might go, or we go into the homes of people as well. So to put it into context in relation to contextual safeguarding, I see in the diagram that was on the video, plus in Ophelia's report, the neighbourhood portion of that, I see that's where we fit in relation to safeguarding and contextual safeguarding. The role of licensing and public protection was recognised as being important in the KC&J reports at previous investigations, and we were seen as being important for the disruptive element that we could carry out in relation to CSE. Safeguarding is embedded within public protection. We've all had training in relation to it. We have officers who are key safeguarding officers, and we are developing a safeguarding action plan and policy within the service as a whole. We do work very closely with the police and with our children's services team, and we share information and work closely and attend the boards. Safeguarding of children and the public is paramount to what we do in licensing services. It's what the whole purpose of the licensing service is about. We've got some new policies and procedures in relation to taxi licensing. They are tough and stringent, and we make no apologies for that. It's important that we are here to protect the public. We are working across West Yorkshire because we realise that, you know, that this isn't something that's just limited to a border. It's across all our areas of work. So that's my brief introduction. I'll hand over to Sam now to go through the report.
Thank you, Wendy. So the report sets out at section 2 just some of the education and the raising of awareness that the licensing service has done in conjunction with the police and other partner agencies. And I won't go into detail, but those premises, the hotel and accommodation providers, they're only required to be licensed in 2 areas. One is if they serve refreshments after 11 o'clock at night, or if they want to sell alcohol, and not all of those premises do. However, that wasn't a factor when we were looking at those providers, and we still went in, gave that training, gave that awareness. That operation was quite successful, and we are continuing to work with the police to find some new dates to continue that work in relation to B&Bs, hotels, takeaways and so forth. As Wendy's already said, the service works already very closely with food safety, and we've formed a bit of a partnership in making sure food safety officers are aware when they're going into premises, they're providing safeguarding training, and they're working with licensing officers as well. We've also operationally set up when licence holders try and transfer their licences, we include food safety now, so they are aware that a food business operator may be changing hands, and that's something before that didn't happen. So they are aware when there are changes happening in food businesses and who is involved in that business. As Wendy said, she mentioned the harmonisation project. Over the last 2 to 3 years, the West Yorkshire authorities, including York, have got together to try and agree some minimum standards. And when we say minimum, we do not mean minimal. We want to make sure these are standards that are high and that protect the public. And where we are with that in my report I said it was going to Licensing and Safety Committee on the 13th of March. It's actually been to Licensing and Safety Committee, and a Kirklees policy for the first time, which encompasses all aspects of taxi licensing, has been agreed and is in place. And so that will be uploaded onto the website within the next few days. In relation to suitability, there is a more robust policy that we have consulted on in relation to suitability. When it talks about convictions, those conviction tariffs have been raised. We are looking at the whole individual in all aspects of their suitability, so it may not necessarily have manifested itself in a conviction, but we will look at that allegation and what the outcome of that was and what it involved and what admissions were made, if they were, when we're considering whether we give somebody a taxi licence. And again, this isn't the licensing authority trying to strike a balance between a taxi driver's right to work. It is about protecting the public, and that is our paramount consideration. At the moment, those consultation responses are being considered across West Yorkshire, and we are due to go back to Licensing and Safety Committee in June to look for approval of that policy. In relation to safeguarding, one of the other aspects that we are looking at the moment and are working on, we've drafted and we've consulted upon it, is a new driver training policy. And as I set out in the report, section 221, it sets out what the 8 areas of the new training policy will include for new applicants. What isn't included in there is that the test mark results for each of those areas has been proposed at 90%. And again, that's higher than it is across most West Yorkshire boroughs at the moment. We are at the moment going through those consultation responses, and again, that report will be brought to Licensing and Safety Committee in June. An additional part of that new driver training policy will be some refreshment training. That will be for existing taxi drivers, and that won't be necessarily test-led, but they will have to complete that training every 3 years, and that's a new addition to what we have across West Yorkshire or at Kirklees. Other work that we're doing has included setting up of the safeguarding group, which Wendy's already made reference to. The safeguarding group is a safeguarding group for public protection, but one of the safeguarding officers is a licensing officer, and we're looking at action plans, policies, training across the service, and that will be both internally and externally. We recognise there is some more work to do, and we are doing that, and that's mainly in relation to licensed premises and raising awareness and providing education to licensed premises at Pub Watch, and developing some more test purchases and partnership working with the police. So I think that's all for me in terms of licensing. If you have any questions, please do let us know.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for the thorough and comprehensive oversight into the work that's being done and taking place. If I can just, before I open up to panel members, just start with the risk and vulnerabilities team. And just a question on, are we confident that we have the resources to be able to provide a flexible and responsive intervention service, as you've outlined, based on a multi-agency assessment of risk and vulnerability. And then moving on from that, if I may, about the single point of contact and the process involved in that, and how that may or may not link into the intelligence portal. And on the intelligence portal, just if you could provide a little bit more information perhaps about the number of schools that have taken up, and is there a cost implication, and is that throughout primary, secondary and further education?
Okay, in regards to the question in relation to the risk and vulnerabilities team and the resources, we're very much in the process of, currently we have the appropriate resources to respond. As needs grow, we will be looking to expand the team. I think that the bit that I'd want to sort of focus on here is around that the risk and vulnerability team is part of the wider children's services. So again, we'll be looking at how then do we actually, again, it's about increasing the understanding and awareness within children's services around appropriate response, so ensuring that children have got the right response at the right time. But also it's about the wider agency or the multi-agency sort of partnership in terms of developing their awareness, and also it's about their engagement within that. So I feel that we've got commitment, and we've got from the wider agency in looking at how then do we actually support the vulnerable children and young people across Kirklees. So our response will be based on very much on a needs-led basis, and we will do some of that through the safeguarding partnership and through other risk and vulnerabilities forums to ensure that children's needs are met appropriately. So.
I'd just like to add, one of the changes we've made in terms of the team itself is originally the team did the risk and vulnerability assessments themselves, as well as the interventions. And what we've actually done with the risk assessments, they've placed those, if actually they're known to a children's social worker, the risk assessments are undertaken by the social worker, so the team themselves do pure support to the child and the family. The other thing that we're looking at is we're meeting with other partners to look at what resources we have across the partnerships in terms of different types of support that are available, so that actually a young person gets the right support for the right need, as well as actually the support to families, because that's really important as well. Because one of the challenges for families when their children become at risk is how they keep them safe. Despite a lot of effort, often they feel frustrated that they can't keep the child safe, so it's really important that we support the families as well.
Just in terms of, in relation to the second question, in terms of the single point of contact, we, in relation to the reasons for doing that, that was based on feedback from partner agencies and external agencies who were clearly right. So we come through in relation to, so they come through a single point of contact. As part of that process, there will be partner agencies that will determine, again, who is the most appropriate person to actually respond. So again, what we don't want is to have any delay in our response to the needs of children and young people. So therefore, a single point of contact or access to determine then, is it children's social care that needs to be the lead organisation? Is it a third sector organisation? So is it our prevent team? Is it our gangs and groups? So again, it's about ensuring that the response is timely. So we're responding to some feedback from our partners. So that's the purpose for us doing that, really. Yeah.
The intelligence portal, first of all, there is no cost, so that's the first thing. It's free for partners to sign up to. The last figures I had were that 28 out of 48 schools have signed up to this, so we will continue to push that. I believe that they're all high schools. I take the point that actually certainly our middle schools and perhaps the top end of our primary schools need to be involved in that. But that is something that we will continue to push. Really important for us to get that intelligence in.
Thank you for that. I think it is important with the reassurance around the risk and vulnerabilities team, the approach has been taken for that. Also with a single point of contact, I think that reassurance and knowing that the right advice and guidance has been offered at that right stage and people know where to go to, and that linked in also with the intelligence portal is another avenue, another way of dealing with that. Take any questions, comments from panel members. Dale?
On the strategic objectives, protect, to develop effective practice. What does effective practice look like?
Well, I think effective practice ultimately looks like children are safeguarded, so we have less children that are involved in exploitative situations. So I suppose it's the outcomes and how we focus on those. Some of this is emerging practice, is not some of these situations that we're dealing with now are not things that we've dealt with before. So I suppose it's looking at how we can work differently to keep those children safe.
My problem is with the word practice. What do you? I mean, obviously, if you are effective, there are fewer children being exploited. But what do you mean by effective practice? Practice of what?
Yeah, I suppose when we're talking about protect, I mean, when a child who has been suffered harm or is at risk of suffering harm, what operationally, what practically are we doing to help that child? So it might that we need to have new services that we haven't previously commissioned or use current services in a different way to address that need. So when we talk about protect, I'm talking about those children that we know are being harmed or at risk of harm, rather than when we look at prevent or we look at prepare, we're looking more broadly at all our children, at those universal services to make sure that we stop that harm happening in the first place. So protect is back to the traditional child protection stuff. When we know a child is at risk of harm or is being harmed, what are we doing? What services do we need to keep them and younger siblings safe?
I have a few questions. Can I start with Superintendent Houston, if that's okay? You talked about peer-on-peer abuse, and I've been looking at CSE for it must be about 5 years now, and it's not something that's been massively discussed in the past, certainly not in meetings I've been in. So I'm going to go away and do a lot more research on that, because that's actually it's feeling a bit new. It probably isn't, but I was on the members panel for years. And I know Ophelia came there, Elaine, you know, we talked about a lot of different things. And the onus, a lot of it always seemed to be on older people abusing younger people rather than, and that's just the feeling I've had from the meetings I've been to. So that was really interesting. So that's more or less a comment. The other thing was the nighttime trade, the bed and breakfast and the hotels in particular. I know one of the West Yorkshire police officers who did some work on that, and they went and did test visits with young people to see if they could get a booking and get a room, and some did and some didn't. And I think that's a really strong piece of work, that there's nothing like seeing if what you're telling them has been taken on board. So I'd be interested to know if there are many more of those operations going to happen. I'm not done yet. Wait a minute. So really, that's the first question, because I think that's better than just going in and having a chat with them. Actually, the chat needs to happen, but actually going back and checking it's been taken on board and they're actually following good practice. So I think that piece of work that the police have, certainly I know an officer who's been involved in that, was excellent. The other thing I'm interested in, and it's something I've only recently started raising in meetings, emerging threats really, in so much as we've had a lot of publicity around CSE over the last 12, 24 months, police cases. That gives the perpetrators as much information as they now need to know what they need to do differently to avoid being caught, and that's something that I have in my mind now, because you know, burglars know what we're going to do to protect our homes. They look for new ways in. So I'm really interested in learning what is coming forward, what you're learning there, doing as new practice, and how that's being dealt with. Because much as we're changing what we're doing and improving, I'm sure they are as well. So if I can maybe do that with Superintendent Houston first and then come back to officers.
Yeah, of course, Councillor Holmes. Peer on peer. I think children have abused other children for many, many years, and you know, I suppose the most obvious one is bullying. But I think if you talk about domestic abuse in young relationships, but perhaps the most prevalent is that use of sexting and encouraging other people to take photographs and send them those over the internet. That's something that we see a lot of, and something that we really need to tackle, which goes back to me saying children can be, you think they're safe in the room, but are they really? So some of that has got to be about raising awareness and teaching our parents how to help keep their children safe online. So that's, but I'll let you do your research on peer on peer. Some pointers there. In terms of the test purchase operation, yes, it is something that we continue to do. In fact, this weekend we've been doing some test purchasing using some of our police cadets, particularly the ones that look a little bit younger than 16, to go into the some shops throughout Kirklees to buy knives in a similar vein. But certainly, yes, doing those test purchase operations is a really good way of just checking that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Again, the intelligence, I'd say that's really, really important. And if members of the community get a whiff that something's happening that shouldn't be happening somewhere, then I would really encourage them to, first of all, call 999, but certainly use Crime Stoppers if it's more vague intelligence that they've got, so that we can target those operations in the best places. But yes, certainly it's something we'll continue to do with our partners. The publicity around CSC, yes, it's very difficult, isn't it, when the courts are open to reporters and details of cases are reported in the press. So what do we need to do to ensure that we continue to combat CSE and catch the perpetrators? I talked about that problem-solving triangle a little bit earlier, and talked about if we've got a problem we need to look at it 3 ways. I suppose the first thing is around our victims. It's about making sure that our children are resilient and try and avoid them being exploited if they are vulnerable. So I suppose that's one thing, and that's around raising awareness, working with parents, working with schools to spot the signs and make sure that if a child is vulnerable, then we're picking up and giving them the support that they need. A constant challenge, particularly given the times that we're in. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is to be intelligence-led around our perpetrators, to look at, you know, where they might be hanging out, what they might be involved in. You know, in Kirklees we haven't had a particularly massive issue in our current investigations around taxi drivers, but that's something that we've picked up from national cases to make sure that our taxi drivers are safe people, that children and vulnerable people can be transported around our road networks. So I suppose it's looking at those locations. You've talked already about hotels, bed and breakfast, making sure that we are preventing people using places, exploiting places for criminal activity. In terms of the cat's out of the bag at court and the perpetrators know what to do, I suppose that is as it is, and there's nothing that we can do, either an agency or partnership, to prevent cases being reported in the courts. That said, some of the non-recent cases that have been through the courts, you know, we don't have the benefit of DNA evidence, we don't have the benefit of CCTV, we have victims' accounts, but by looking at how we can show how true and authentic those victims' accounts, looking for the little bits of corroboration where we might find them, be they in medical records, social services records, accounts from other people, then we have built some really strong cases and had some really good convictions. So I think there's lots that we can do, and actually I think the more that these cases are publicised, the less places there are for people to hide, and people realise that that kind of behaviour is just not to be tolerated. So hopefully that will improve the way in which our communities respond and make our Kirklees a safer place for our children and young people.
I was aware of peer-on-peer abuse, but it's not been widely talked about in certainly the meetings I've been in regarding CSE. That was what I was meaning on that. I was aware of peer-on-peer, because obviously, that's a general, awful, general thing, but it was a CSE element to that. And it has been mentioned, but not massively, as it seems to be becoming more of a talked about subject now. The thing is about B&Bs and hotels, the better we get, the better they're going to get, and I think there's that danger it may go underground and it goes to people's houses and flats, which is a lot more difficult, and it's a no-win situation in some ways. So you're back to empowering the young people to not be in that position, and I'm absolutely 100% behind that. What I didn't hear, and I've heard it elsewhere, I just want to keep it in focus. I think the best protection for a young person is always that they have at least one person in their life that they feel some sort of appropriate love and trust with. I know I've been that for one of my daughter's friends who had a fallout with their family, and they kind of came to my door, and I know that it was only a temporary need, but it gave them then the strength to go and rebuild their relationship with their family. So I want us to keep talking about that, because I think that's really, really important for building this resilience we keep talking about. And I know I'm a bit fluffy when it comes to children, and I don't think that's wrong. I know what I am. I'm a little bit soft, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. One thing to Ophelia, we talked about MISPAs, and I know you came to CSE panel a long time ago, and the return interviews, and I just wondered what percentage we were at with that now, how many were actually engaging in having a return interview. The other thing you mentioned, PACE. I have met PACE. I went with another councillor, we went over to Leeds to meet them, and I'm really, really happy to hear that we're talking so much about families being involved now, because that is one thing PACE were absolutely clear about, that if you want to know and you want to support, want to know what's happening with young people, and you want to support them if they're having trouble, half the time if you talk to the family and give them the strength and the support that they need, you kind of part way there with everything else. We didn't really speak about mental health of these vulnerable young people. I think that's a really key part of this. Again, back to resilience and their ability to make good choices and not be taken advantage of. And I would think one of those, we talked about families where they come from what you would consider a good home with good parents, good support, and yet they have that vulnerable period. That vulnerable period could be a state of a temporary mental health issue for whatever reason. So I'd like to hear a bit more about how we're working on that. And I'm really pleased to hear about this intelligent portal. I think that's a fabulous idea. I've heard mention of that before, but it's the first time I've heard any real detail on it. You talked about school and the council feeding in. I'm interested to know how councils are feeding in. I'm not aware of anything on my ward. If I was, or anywhere in the area, I would be shouting about it. I'm not aware of anything, but should I be? And we've all done training about vulnerability, CSE, everything else. So I'd quite like to know how we feed into that, because we are, like you, we're on the ground, we know people, people come to us. So I think we might be a little bit of help. Equally, this 28 out of 48 schools who've signed up, if there are any schools on particular wards, we tend to know our head teachers at the schools on our ward. I certainly know the head teachers on my ward. So it would be, something I would certainly like to be involved in. If there's any conversations I can have to support everybody and get the schools on board, I'm more than pleased to do that.
So I'll start with the first question in relation to return interviews. So just in relation to the return interviews, all children and young people who have been reported missing are offered a return interview. What we have to do, again, is ensuring that it's the right person. So we do identify, because we need to recognise that not all young people want to speak to one of our officers. They'd rather speak to a trusted adult, somebody that they already know, so we actually factor that in. So that's considered as part of the work that we do. So we've got to ensure that, again, that we've got the right person engaged with the right young person as well. So that's considered. Most of our young people are more than willing to have a conversation about what's happened. What we will do as part of that work is that we, again, also acknowledge that they don't want to share everything with you immediately. So what we will do, where we think there's some other concerns, is that we will work with them for a period of weeks. So if we've got a young person where we think actually it would be really helpful to do a piece of work for 2 or 3 more sessions with them, then that's part of the offer that we will do as part of that. So that's something that we've extended. That wasn't in there before, but that's another area of work that we've developed over the last 6 months in terms of not just going out and doing a return interview, but also identifying a piece of direct work where it's deemed appropriate.
So are most, if not all, young people who go missing from care, we're talking about care mainly, but all young people, are they speaking to somebody when they come back? Right, that's okay.
So I know that you talked about as well ensuring that children and young people, and I suppose just want to pick up a point that you made earlier in terms of making sure that children and young people have somebody that they're, in terms of building their resilience. That's what the model of risk and vulnerability is based on, very much around a trusted adult, whoever that trusted adult is. It could be a neighbour. It could be somebody in school. So again, we're looking to look at, because that's one of the questions that we check with young people. Who are you already working with that you trust and that you feel able to share information? So that's one of the things that we work with. And then we actually offer support to the trusted adult, so they're not on their own. So again, we offer them support. We offer them the opportunity to offload, because again, sometimes it's quite a lot of information to take in. So we ensure that not just offering the young person, we also work with the trusted adult as well. So in terms of the work around mental health, that's part of the work that we do. We've got to consider in terms of the young person's emotional well-being, and what work do we need to do in terms of how do we build their self, because I did sort of briefly touch on in terms of building their self-esteem, looking at how we can build their confidence. It's about, but again, it's not just about the individual, it's about within their family unit and their wider peer group. So again, you can't just do that within isolation. We do have services in terms of our CAMs where we can actually access services for children and young people who have been groomed or exploited. So there is that in place. So again, this is done as part of a package. Also, what we have to consider, what is it, at what point do we need to actually consider and talk to in terms of young people? So again, it's very much around focus. We can go and say, right, I'm going to talk about your emotional well-being and your self-esteem, and they're going to go, I don't want to talk about that you right now. So we've got to keep that within sight. But again, it's very much working at the pace of the young person in terms of how can we ensure that they trust us as well in terms of that work, but also we're ensuring that we're keeping them safe.
Just on to bed and breakfasts. Bed and breakfast can pop up pretty quick and disappear pretty quick. And we've got things like Airbnb now, which
I can imagine makes test purchases rather difficult because most of them are just a phone call. And the other thing I was going to say about bed and breakfast was, it's not always somebody turning up at the door. Sometimes it is a phone call, and them phone calls can be at 5 to midnight sometimes. Have you got a room? Which you then have to sort of pick out a little bit of what they want a room for, who for, and this, that and the other. And I think maybe some sort of bed and breakfast proprietors and them sort of people need to be able to, maybe a little bit more knowledge on what they need to pick out on that phone call. I mean, personally, if I got a phone call at 5 to midnight saying I want a room for me and my teenage daughter or something like that, I'd probably turn around and say I haven't got one. You know, but I wouldn't necessarily ring the police because it could have been a genuine booking. So it's how, you know, I don't know how you'd handle that. I mean, obviously I do quite a lot in B&B trade, so it is, you know, knocking on the door and turning up and saying, have you got a room with somebody for a few hours? Yeah, that should sound the alarm bells straight away. But I'm just wondering, how do you deal with the odd phone calls sort of side?
I think that's incredibly difficult, really. I suppose we're back to educating people using things like potentially, I don't know, Chamber of Commerce, but that through the licensing, those premises that are licensed, to try and educate their staff and make sure that they do alert the authorities to any concerns. I suppose the other side, an Airbnb, yes, you're right, it would be a nightmare. Trying to manage that one, but I suppose it's about us being intelligence-led. There are all sorts of things that we can do if we've got a clear intelligence case to say that something might be going on, over and above just turning up at somebody's address and trying to book into a room with a young person. But yeah, that's it. You know, we are like all public services, we're all stretched out, so we have to focus our efforts where it's most important. I have a lot of resources allocated to safeguarding. That's been a growth industry, so amongst our resources that we have, I have a lot within safeguarding, but that's where we need the community really to help us, to give us that intelligence so that we can keep the public safe, really. So, which probably leads me back to something that Councillor Holmes raised around the intelligence portal. I could be more than happy to speak to the councillors, whether it's the leaders or more broadly get somebody to come and give a presentation around the intelligence portal and how that might be something that you want to link into direct, and certainly something that we can link in with our community hubs, so that people can get that intelligence flowing through. Yeah, that's what we need, the eyes and ears of the community really to give us that intelligence so that we can focus our efforts to keep our children safe.
The hotels test, I couldn't help thinking whether reporting would have been higher if the policeman had been accompanied by a male cadet rather than a female cadet. Which led me to thinking, is the CSE of boys more hidden than that of girls? And is it more difficult to develop strategies to highlight potential areas for the exploitation of boys rather than girls?
Just in relation to we as an organisation recognise that exploitation happens to both male and female. What we do, what we know is recognise that there's an underreporting, I think, in relation to males and also whether they see themselves as being exploited or not. But in relation to the work, we recognise that it happens to both males and females. So we're doing our work in relation to continuing to develop that awareness and broader understanding. And I think it's about the work that we do with young men in relation to what they see as exploitation. Because we often see males who are very much linked more into criminal exploitation than sexual exploitation, but we do recognise that it does happen, and we'll continue to do that work in terms of developing the area of work. But it is much more of a challenge, and it's much more complex in terms of identifying that.
I'm glad you used the word challenge, because that, I found it a challenge just thinking about how you would actually do that. Sorry.
No, sorry about that. I think why we've taken this approach to look across all the vulnerabilities is actually seeing the overlap. So often with young males, it's the numbers of missing episodes, and it's really exploring the nature of those episodes and doing the interviews to understand why they're missing, where they're going, and so to seeing that crossover and keeping an open mind of what young people are experiencing. And I think we are, it is an improving picture in terms of understanding and being notified, but there is always more work to be done.
Any other questions of panels? Comments from panel members? If I could just ask on, you spoke at the very beginning about services that are offered to victims, and the victims are now adults, and also to their children. Can I ask about the family members or children belong to the perpetrators, and what support is provided to them?
Yes, certainly. Very much heavily involved with families in terms of their experience of living with someone that's been identified as a perpetrator. So a full family assessment in terms of the impact on the adults, the main adults in the family or the children, and offering the support that they require, because that will be different for each individual. And so it is that bespoke plan and support around families, seeing that on most occasions this is new, they've not been aware of this, so it can actually have quite an impact. So they may not want immediate support, but actually keeping the door open if they want to come back to services, starting with children's social care, but looking at partners across the piece in terms of that support. And again, it comes back to the communities and the strength of the communities and how they support families within the community.
Any other questions, comments? No? Okay, so I'm ready to wrap it up for today, but I think just looking forward, could you comment on when Dr. Peel's review is completed, when that would be coming to scrutiny for some comment, and also what you'd like to because we're keen and eager to ensure that the work that takes place here at this panel, that we can look at everything as a whole and not duplicate or hinder any other reviews or work that's taken place at this time.
Hi. Yes, so the plan will be that we'll, towards the end of March, beginning of May, towards the end of April, beginning of May, we'll get the response from Dr. Peel. But as my colleagues have already described, we've also got the National Crime Agency coming in to, not the National Crime Agency, sorry, wrong one, the National Working Group are here looking at current practice. Sorry, completely rewind that. They're here looking at current practice, and what we'd like to do then is have a single action plan around improvements that we might make so that we're learning from history but also from today. The plan will be then that at an officer level that our improvement board will oversee the implementation of that, and at a political level we would expect scrutiny then yourselves to have that as part of your work plan to oversee any actions that we're taking on that.
Okay, thank you for that. I think just to finish, I think looking at the strategic objectives, which I think are very, very well placed, it's encouraging to see the partnership commitment and the approach being taken, which was mentioned earlier, most recently on Friday, the event that took place where partners, different agencies were able to come together, contribute and learn, and take everything in that context as well. So it is reassuring to see the work that is taking place, working together to be able to share best practice and contribute in that way. So thank you all for coming, for sharing that with us today. We will want to look at how we work closely, as you just said, going forward, and how we can contribute as a panel to the work that is taking place within Kirklees. Councillor Holmes.
Can I just check, have you heard something different? Because when Dr. Peel did his sort of like interim review, he said end of March for his report.
Said Easter, I didn't wish to say for that.
Said end of March according to my notes.
Okay. That must be then, well, I did say the end of March, so we haven't had it yet, we're only a week away, so we've got Dr. Peel here tomorrow doing the session, so we'll clarify the date for you at that point.
Just another point I thought was really important to add. Last week we appointed a senior manager for transitional safeguarding that will be the conduit between children and adult services, that will look to allow our learning from people that have experienced CSC and put that into context now and do coordinated responses with agencies. My other offer would be as well for members of Scrutiny, if you wish to come and visit the front door where our risk and vulnerability hub sits, to actually see how that works in practice, and then you have the opportunity to talk to practitioners and get that deeper understanding of the work that they're doing with young people and families. We can certainly facilitate that.
Okay, thank you for that. I think panel members are always keen and eager to contribute in any way that we can. If there's any opportunities for us to be more involved and add to that process, we will look forward to working in a constructive way with the work that's taking place. Thank you. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much.